I used to work as a bartender in Hamilton at a few different places too, but my favorite spot was a wine bar that sat within walking distance of my apartment. It was about a 30 to 40-minute walk, so I used the term walking distance pretty loosely. But my route ran from King Street West to Westdale Village, which were some of the safer areas of the city. So before the night in question, at least, I had never run into any trouble on the way home. I was a woman of just 23 at the time, and I was acutely aware that I was putting myself at risk by walking alone at night. But after the first few trips, once I saw how quiet and deserted my route was, I started doing it every night. I became so comfortable that I even started listening to music during my walks, but only in one earphone and only at low volume, so I could still hear what was happening around me. But no matter how vigilant I was, no matter how quiet my route felt, I guess it was only a matter of time before my luck ran out. And when it did, it ran out in a big way. It had been a quiet Wednesday evening at the wine bar when we closed around 11:30. And then, after a quick clean down, my co-workers and I clocked out and headed home around 11:45. We said our goodbyes, and then I set off on my usual route, which at first took me through a series of quiet back streets before I turned onto a long, tree-lined avenue. Chidoki Golf Course area was on my left. Buildings stood to the right, with hardly any traffic moving up and down the road. As I walked, a rare vehicle passed me before turning onto the street ahead. I noticed in passing that it was a white van, and paid just enough attention to recognize it when it drove by a second time, taking the exact same turn. I thought that the van was just driving around in circles, so I wasn't surprised when I saw it come around the block again. But instead of passing me, it slowed to a crawl at the curb, and I heard the driver calling out to me. I took out my single earphone, and I saw a tubby-looking guy with sandy brown hair sitting in the driver's seat. When we made eye contact, he asked if I was from around here. I didn't walk over to his window right away. I just told him, "Sure." Then he replied, "Oh, thank God. The last couple were all tourists." Before long, he asked if I knew where a particular street was. I did know where it was, and I actually understood why he was having trouble finding it too, because it was one of those awkward side streets with terrible signage that's hard to spot unless you already know it's there. I started trying to explain how to get there, but I quickly realized that I was explaining it poorly. So when he held up a map and asked if I minded showing him, because he would only forget what I told him, I didn't think twice. I guess this is the part where I explained something about the driver, something that had me lowering my guard in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise. If this had been some creepy-looking a-hole staring at me from his driver's seat, sort of saying, "Hey girl, you got a man," then there's no way in hell I would have walked over like I did. But this guy with sandy brown hair and a blue polo seemed a little, I don't know how to put this other than slow. He had this kind of childlike innocence about him, like he was too dumb to be bad. And when he mentioned something about helping his mom move into a new apartment, I picked up this harmless vibe from him. But that was the point, because if I was the fish, then he was the lure, and I fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker, as they say. I walked over to his window, and he held the map out for me to point at it. But then, no sooner had I touched the paper, the van's center door slid open on my left, and a man came leaping out the back. The sudden noise of the door sliding open scared the hell out of me, so I jumped back on instinct before the guy's feet even touched the concrete. And then, once it hit me what was really going on, when I realized how dumb I'd been to fall for what was obviously a trap, I started running as fast as I could. I tried to get away, but the guy chasing me caught up fast. So the best I could do was run for some railings that belonged to one of the buildings, and all I could think was, they can't get me in the van if they can't get me off those railings. So I held on to them for dear life and started screaming for help. As the guy wrapped his arms around my waist and started trying to drag me back toward the van, all I could do was scream while holding on harder than I ever had to anything before. The guy pulled so hard I thought my arms might break, but I knew that was better than whatever was waiting for me in that van. He tried pulling my hands free by the wrists, but I managed to bite him on the hand, right on the bony part on the back. So he screamed and let go, but he was so mad that he started trying to punch me directly in the face too. I guess it was to try and knock me out so I'd let go. He pulled his fist back and swung at me, but I saw it coming and started shrinking down, so all he could do was punch my neck and the back of my head. He then started trying to kick my wrists so I'd let go of the railings, but every time he got close, I would regain my grip as he lunged down to grab me. I was screaming the whole time, but after he failed to kick my hands free from their grip, he joined in with the yelling too, and told his buddy in the driver's seat to come give him a hand. Now I thought I had done a pretty good job holding that one guy off and stopping him from dragging me away, but I knew that the two of them working together would be the end of it. So when I looked around and saw the bigger, tubbier guy opening his door, I started wailing along with screaming. I wasn't just screaming for help anymore. I was begging them not to take me, saying I'd do anything if they would just leave me alone. But neither man was interested. They had already made up their minds about what they wanted to do with me, and there was no reasoning with them. But then, just as the bigger guy started walking toward us from the van, I heard someone yelling from all the way across the street, shouting for them to get their hands off me right now. Someone was running toward us, wearing nothing but a robe, their underwear, and a pair of sneakers. But the thing that really caught my attention was the big old hockey stick they were carrying. The tubby guy ran back to his driver's seat the second he saw the man with the stick. And then the scumbag trying to drag me off the railings did the same when he realized they were suddenly in for a fair fight. He ran and jumped into the back. Then, as soon as he slid the door closed, the van took off, and the man running toward us had to dart out of the way so it didn't hit him. He took a swing at it with his hockey stick as it sped off, then turned back to me, running over to ask if I was hurt or needed help. He turned out to be the owner of a store across the street, someone who lived in the apartment above it. He had been up late and heard me screaming from the moment I started. He actually apologized for taking so long because he had to throw on some clothes and grab his hockey stick. But I didn't mind, because he was literally my hero in that moment. He invited me into his store so I could wait for the cops there and get something warm to drink. I accepted, and within about 30 minutes, I was talking to a pair of Hamilton Police Service officers with a mug of hot cocoa in my hands. I told them everything, though they weren't much help, and so did the store owner. Once I was done, they were kind enough to give me a ride home so I wouldn't have to head back out into the dark after going through something so terrifying. I guess it was the least they could do, but it still meant a lot to me. Just like the help I got from Mr. Hockey Stick and his little furniture store. A piece of it now sits in my apartment as a kind of thank you memento. Not of how close I came to being abducted, but of that perfect moment of compassion and kindness that sent him running to my rescue in his underwear with nothing but a hockey stick. Back when I was freshly graduated and working my first real job in the city, some coworkers invited me out for drinks with them on a Friday night. I had a great time, and it felt good getting to know them in such a relaxed and different setting. Then, at around 1 o'clock in the morning, I decided to call it a night and take a cab home. I walked out of the club and headed toward one of the larger streets, where I was more likely to find an empty cab, when I realized I had somehow lost my purse. I knew the chances of getting it back that night were slim to none, and the smartest move was to cancel my card and accept that any cash inside was gone. After calling around to a few friends and family members to see if anyone could give me a ride home, I found out that everyone with a car was either drunk, asleep, or both. I realized that if I wanted to get home that night, I either had to accept a ride from a complete stranger or walk a seriously long distance on my own in the dark. Since the first option scared the hell out of me, I chose the second and started walking. I cannot stress enough how grateful I was that I had worn sneakers that night. I made steady progress away from the busier, more party-focused parts of downtown and toward the quieter, less populated areas. It was actually kind of nice walking through all those abandoned places. They were usually packed with life during the day, and now they felt calm and empty. But it was also unsettling. I kept forcing the image out of my head of some creep jumping out at me from the shadows. I paid close attention to where I walked, kept checking around me to be sure no one was following, and tried to stay in well-lit areas. Then, when I finally saw another person, I felt a brief wave of panic, silently hoping they would be normal. That feeling stopped as soon as I looked closer and realized it was not some guy in a hoodie planning to follow me home. It was another girl, about my age and dressed much like I was. She was walking on the opposite side of the street as I turned a corner, and we were heading in the same direction. When we made eye contact, she asked if I wanted to walk together. She came across as very outgoing and friendly. I knew that two women walking together was much safer than one walking alone. I figured it made sense and agreed. She crossed the street and introduced herself. She said her name was Megan and explained that she might have accidentally given her cab fare to a bartender who probably thought it was just a tip. We joked about how she had unknowingly earned some good karma and that the $20 would probably come back to her somehow. The conversation continued as we walked. About a third of the way into the trip, we saw a guy stumble out from a side street and start walking in the same direction. He was on the opposite side of the street, so there was a nice, safe distance between us. It also took him a minute to realize that we were there, and when he did, he started yelling things like, "What's up, ladies? Need a little company over there?" I did my best to ignore him, and so did Megan, but then, under her breath, she said, "No, thank you," in a way that had us both stifling giggles. The guy asked what the hell we were laughing about, and at first, he sounded pretty chill, but then he shifted to, "Wait, you two are laughing at me, aren't you?" And he started to sound genuinely offended. Over the next few minutes, we listened to him yelling things like, "Oh, I get it. You think you're better than me, is that it?" While at first he sounded kind of hurt in a jerk-off sort of way, he grew angrier and angrier as we just kept walking. In the end, Megan suddenly explained that her place wasn't far and that I was welcome to come inside for a drink and a bathroom stop before I walked the rest of the way home. I really needed to pee at the time, so I would have accepted anyway. But having that drunk a-hole now basically following us completely sealed the deal. I accepted her invite, and then we darted down the next side street so we could lose our not-so-charming traveling companion. When we heard him yelling, we picked up our pace a little, laughing at how outraged he sounded. I asked her if she thought he would follow us, and she replied, "Probably, but watch this," before turning us down another, smaller street. We were completely out of sight, leaving the drunk guy yelling aimlessly in the road, and we only had to walk a few more minutes before Megan said, "We've arrived." It took me by surprise because we were walking past these really nice houses with gates and courtyards out front. I lived in a crummy apartment, but here was Megan, not much older than me, and she had this beautiful house. I was so taken aback that I kind of froze on the spot and told her her place was amazing. Megan smiled like that was something she heard all the time. I couldn't stop the barrage of questions that followed, but Megan was gracious enough to answer them. She said she lived alone and paid a pretty hefty discount on the rent because she rented from a family friend. I remember thinking how jealous I was, but in a way where I was still happy for her. Megan just smiled again before inviting me inside. The gate wasn't locked, so she pushed the latch and opened it. We stepped into a cute terracotta courtyard with shrubs lining both sides of the path. A security light turned itself on as we got closer to the door. But just before it did, effectively blinding me if I tried to look up, I could have sworn I saw a curtain twitch on the second floor of the house. Now, as we reached the door, I asked Megan if anyone was staying with her, and when she said no, I reached for her arm and stopped her from unlocking it. She asked what I was doing. I told her about the twitching curtain and how it made me think we had been watched from the second floor. She told me it was probably just the alcohol messing with my eyes and that no one was inside. So I backed up a little from the porch and looked up at the windows again. The security light had turned off because nothing was moving on the path, which meant I was not blinded by it when I looked up. And when I did, I saw the curtains twitch in a second-floor window again, clear as day, like I caught them looking. I told her that it really felt like someone was in her house. I said we needed to call the cops, but she snapped back, saying I needed to chill. She told me to just come inside, relax, and have a drink. She said a bunch of other things, but I did not hear them. All I could hear were the alarm bells blaring in my head because of the way Megan was acting. I might have been a little drunk, but I was not stupid. And I slowly began to suspect the unthinkable. Megan was not just drunk and overconfident. She knew someone was in that house. And since all that seemed to matter to her was getting me inside, I realized things were not as they seemed. At first, all I wanted was to call the cops, because it felt safer that way. But then, once I realized Megan maybe was not who she said she was, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I did not even say goodbye. I just turned around and walked back toward the gate. Then the last thing Megan said, still in character, sounded almost offended when she said, "You're not leaving." And then, no more than a few steps later, I heard the sound of feet rushing up the path behind me before Megan suddenly grabbed me by the hair. I asked what the hell she was doing, but she was done talking to me, and she was done listening too. She did not try to hit me or anything. She just tried to hold me steady, and then my eardrums felt like they were about to burst when she screamed right up close to me, "Get down here and help me!" I think hearing that sent me into overdrive, and I managed to push her to the ground before pulling my hair out of her grip. I felt that horrible burn as some of it was torn from my scalp, and I did not care, because I was free to run toward the front gate again. But right as I did, I saw someone standing in the open doorway of the house. Someone huge, and they were there to chase me down. I ran harder and faster than I ever did during high school track, which, without blowing my own trumpet too much, was pretty damn fast. I only looked back once as I tore through the streets, and the man chasing me was so close that I felt like I might burst into tears while running at full speed. All I did was run, pushing as hard as I could until I spotted an interstate frontage road with a few cars moving back and forth. I ran straight out into the road and into the path of an oncoming car, which had to brake the moment it saw me. The driver was clearly pissed, but when I tried to show him what I was running from, there was no sign of the man who had been chasing me. I remember him cracking his car door open just enough to tell me to get the hell out of the way. And so I did. I staggered back to the sidewalk on shaky legs and then called the cops. Most of the walk back to my apartment was spent on the phone with them as I explained how I had just escaped a potential kidnapping, or maybe something worse. The dispatcher said she would send an officer to the house I described and gave me a case number so I could call back and ask what they found. But I didn't need to, because the very next day, a state police detective called and asked if he could come by. He seemed extremely interested in Megan and disappointed that I hadn't gotten a clear look at whoever had been inside the house, which turned out to be unfurnished and owned by a realtor who had no idea two people had broken in. They were gone by the time the cops arrived, and the only trace left behind was a strip of masking tape on a wall that the forensics team said was clean. The detective said that while I had gotten very, very lucky, it was my smarts that saved my ass by figuring out it was a trap. But to me, it wasn't any of that. I got away that night because those sick freaks were too impatient, and Megan was too bad of an actress to quiet the alarm bells going off in my head. They might have been smart enough to walk away from whatever they planned, but I swear that if they had been just a little smarter, I'm not sure I'd be here writing this right now. In November of 2010, a few pals of mine and I went out for a lads' night to celebrate our mate Ryan's 25th birthday. We started at a steakhouse before a long pub crawl and ended up at a club until around midnight, when I decided to catch the last bus home. I wished the birthday boy a safe trip home, said my goodbyes to everyone else with hugs all around, and then walked out of the club and headed toward the Hamilton Go Center. When I checked the time on the way, I noticed I was cutting it a bit fine, but I still thought I was going to make it. Then I remembered turning a corner and seeing my bus at its stand in the distance, taking on the last passengers in the queue to board. I ran like hell trying to catch it, shouting for them to wait, but either the driver thought I was just some mad drunk on a tear, or he ignored me to stay on schedule, because before I could even get close, the bus pulled away from the stand and drove off without me. I was absolutely gutted, not just because I'd missed it, but because I'd spent so much money on food and drinks that I couldn't afford a taxi. If the same thing happened today, I'd be able to move money between accounts using my banking app, or get my girlfriend to send me some, and then pay using contactless on my phone. But back then, that wasn't an option. I also didn't want to mess a driver around by saying something like, "Look, mate, I might have some cash at home. Will you give me a lift on the off chance I've got enough?" And so I bit the bullet and decided to just walk it. After hitting the road, I called my girlfriend and told her what had happened. She laughed and said it sounded like I'd had a good time, and then I asked if she had any cash on her to pay for a cab. She didn't, but when she offered to get dressed and walk to the nearest cash point, I told her not to bother. She asked how long the walk would take me, and when I said about an hour and a half, she said she'd have some food and a nice hot bath ready for me by the time I got in. I thanked her, told her I loved her, and said I'd see her soon. The first part of the walk wasn't that bad, actually. I was still quite drunk and in a really good mood after seeing all the lads, so my spirits were high as I moved farther away from the city center. About 40 minutes in, and still with quite a way to go, I was walking along a straight stretch of road near the women's hospital. I was quietly whistling "Don't Stop Believin'" to myself, because it had been played at almost every place we'd gone to, when I suddenly felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I thought it would be my girlfriend asking if I was okay or how far I had left to go. And while it was her sending me a text, all it said was, "Help." I hit the call button, hoping she'd just hit send too early on some harmless message. But I only heard one ring before the call was forwarded to voicemail. When I pulled my phone away from my ear, I saw that she was typing something. When the messages came through, I started shaking like a pooping dog, because all they said was, "Someone's in the house. I'm under the bed." I told her to call 999. She texted back seconds later, saying she couldn't because the person inside would hear her. I texted her back, "I'll call then," and dialed 999 as fast as I could. I couldn't run because I needed to stay on the line with the operator. But I also couldn't just walk because everything in my head was screaming at me to run. So I was talking to this woman while going back and forth between speed walking and jogging, panting into the phone about how my girlfriend needed help. It all came out as one long burst of word vomit, because the most important thing was getting the address to her so the police could arrive as fast as possible. I feel terrible saying this now, but the way she spoke to me was so calm that it made me really angry. I remember reaching a point where I was shouting, "Please, I'm begging you, someone's in the house with her." In response, all she asked was, "Can you tell me what this person looks like?" In the most nonchalant voice I can imagine. I lost my temper and shouted, "Of course I bloody don't, because I'm not there, am I? Just get someone out here, please. I'm literally begging you." All she said back in the same deadpan voice was something like, "I understand you're upset, but I have to ask these questions for the officers. They're on their way to your address as we speak." When I asked how long they would be, she wouldn't give me an exact time. She said no more than a couple of minutes, because they had a unit in the area. I asked her to promise me they were going as fast as they could. When she did, I thanked her, said I had to go, and hung up. I stopped to fire off one last text, asking my girlfriend if she was okay, then started legging it down the road. I kept my phone in my hand, hoping it would vibrate with her reply. The longer it stayed quiet, the more scared I became. I played a lot of football back then, so I was in decent shape. But with all that beer and sambuca in my stomach, I had to fight it, because I couldn't afford to stop. When it finally came, the first wave of vomit streamed down the front of my white shirt. I spat out the rest and kept running. Once it started, though, I couldn't stop, and a sudden spasm in my stomach slowed me to a halt before I doubled over and vomited again. I knew I had to get it all out, so I heaved until my stomach felt empty. When it finally did, I pulled myself upright and got ready to run again. But then I suddenly saw a light shining out to me in the distance. And at the time, it felt like it was a light shining down from heaven. It was the light on top of a black cab, saying it was vacant and on for a job. And when I saw it, an idea struck me. I could flag it down, explain the situation, and then swear on my mother's life that I'd get him the fare that I owed him if he just got me home to my girlfriend. At the time, I couldn't imagine anyone kicking me out of their cab after hearing that. So, as the light got closer, I started jumping up and down and waving my arms until I saw his turn signal start flashing. The driver pulled his cab over, and I noticed that he had his passenger window open. So I was thinking I'd explain everything there, then jump into the back when I got the go-ahead. But I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me up close. He looked genuinely disgusted. And then I remembered how I was absolutely drenched in my own sick, and he probably thought I was just some lone drunk who'd puked all over himself. And while I suppose that was technically the truth, it obviously wasn't the whole story. Now I'm screaming, "No, no, 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 wait, wait, wait!" And as he drove off and then sped away into the distance, all I wanted to do was scream at the top of my lungs. I didn't. It would have been a waste of time and energy. And since I'd already wasted enough puking up my guts and trying to flag down a cab, I started running again as fast as I could. And I didn't stop until I could see flashing blue police lights outside my house. It was a relief to know that they were actually on their way, just like the 999 operator said. But I still didn't know if my girlfriend was actually okay or not. And since she hadn't replied to the "You okay?" text I'd sent before I started running, I had this terrible feeling that she wasn't. I ran up to my door and unlocked it. Then, as soon as it was open, I started calling out my girlfriend's name at the top of my lungs as I ran for the stairs. But I hadn't even touched the bottom step before a policeman appeared from the living room and said, "It's all right, mate. She's in here. Everything's fine." He said everything was fine, but what he really meant was that nobody was hurt, because my girlfriend was anything but fine when I saw her. The police had only been there a few minutes, so she was still in floods of tears from all the fear. But also, from the relief of those two policemen arriving when they did. She ran up and tried to give me this big hug when I walked into our living room. But then we had this really quite surreal moment where she stopped dead when she saw the state of me. She had tears in her eyes, snot coming out of her nose, and she pointed at my shirt and asked, "Is that puke?" I explained that I'd vomited on myself while running home to help her, and that only made her start crying again. She later said it was because she realized how helpless I must have felt. And she was exactly right. I have never felt so powerless in my entire life. After changing my shirt and giving myself a quick baby wipe bath, I went back downstairs and made a cup of tea for myself and my girlfriend. She had not fully explained to the police how everything had happened yet, because the first thing they did when they arrived was search the house to make sure it was safe. That meant I was there when she finally told them the full story. Not long after I called to tell her I was going to be late, my girlfriend was in the kitchen making us a bit of food when she suddenly heard a noise coming from the window in the back pantry. It was a very soft sound, so she thought it might have been one of the stray cats she loved to feed, drawn in by the smell of bacon on the grill. But when she walked into the back room, she saw it was not a cat climbing through the window. It was a man, and he was forcing himself inside. She said he was already head and shoulders through the window when she found him. And even though he was wearing a ski mask of some kind, so she could only see his eyes, she said they almost lit up when he saw her. She thought he might slide back out and run off once she caught him. But seeing her only seemed to make him more determined to squeeze the rest of his body through. That was when she ran upstairs and hid under the bed. She said she could hear him from her hiding place, moving from room to room. But he was not looking for phones or laptops or game consoles. He was not interested in any of that. He was interested in her. She told the police about texting me and how she remembered something about deaf people being able to use a 999 text service. She tried that, but did not know you had to register before you could use it. None of her messages ever got a reply. By the time I texted her asking if she was okay, the man who broke in was so close that she was afraid he would hear her thumbs tapping on her phone screen if she tried to respond. So she stopped altogether. She said she was so scared she barely breathed when he walked into our bedroom. She lay flat on her stomach with one hand over her mouth, watching his black trainers step softly across the carpet, moving like he was trying to creep up on her wherever she was hiding. At first, she said that gave her hope, because she took it as a sign he did not know where she was yet. But after pacing the room for a moment, the man stopped suddenly and stood still, facing the bed. My girlfriend said she thought that was it. She believed he was about to reach under the bed, drag her out kicking and screaming, and then do God knows what to her. But instead, the man began laughing, quietly at first, before it grew into an almost childish giggle. She kept waiting for him to pounce and started planning how she was going to bite him and scratch him, anything to keep him off her. But instead of lunging at her, he walked toward her dresser and then toward the mirror. He stayed there for a second, and my girlfriend thought he was looking at himself or something. But when they both heard the police sirens, he bolted out of our bedroom, ran down the stairs, and escaped out the back door, which was how the police managed to get inside to look for my girlfriend. It was only when she was certain it was really the police, and not some trick by the man hunting her, that she came out of hiding and made herself known. But when she saw something written on our bedroom mirror, she said she burst into tears. He had used one of her lipsticks to write 3 small words: "I found you," like it was some sick game he was playing for his own amusement. She said she couldn't give them much of a description because all she had really seen were his eyes and his trainers. Even then, she couldn't be sure what color his eyes were, only that his trainers were black Nikes with a dark red swoosh. The police said that detail could actually be very helpful, and she might be surprised how often people get caught because of the shoes they're wearing. That gave us hope that whoever it was might be found and arrested. But after weeks and weeks of hearing nothing back, we called the number we'd been given and were told there had been no progress at all. I wasn't surprised, because even though I tried to stay outwardly hopeful for my girlfriend's sake, I didn't expect much from the police. I'm not saying they don't work hard at their jobs, but without fingerprints or DNA, and without any real description to go on, there wasn't much they could do except advise us to keep all our windows closed and locked at night. But that was the thing. My girlfriend hadn't just left the back window open. It was November, and it was bitterly cold outside. She had literally only opened it minutes before she put the bacon on, so the smell wouldn't build up in the kitchen. And that's what made us think that either she was incredibly unlucky and opened the window at the exact moment some creep decided to peek over the back wall, or whoever tried to climb through that window had already been watching her, saw it open, and realized she had just given him away inside. Both possibilities made me feel sick to think about, and it meant we didn't mind paying extra to install more locks on the front and back doors. We're also extremely vigilant about open windows now, even during the daytime in summer. And my girlfriend, now my wife, never leaves them open at night when she's alone, not even during summer heat waves. It can be a real pain sometimes, but don't get me wrong. It's worth it to know that the same horrible scenario won't play out again, because I'm not sure my nerves could handle another round. So I have a scar, a very noticeable one, running almost horizontally along my cheekbone under my eye. It gets a lot of attention from certain people who sometimes ask how I got it. Instead of telling them the truth, I always make something up, like saying I got it from a bad fall back when I used to skate. I'm not a particularly private person, and I even enjoy telling the story when the mood feels right. It's just a long story, and one that brings me down to tell, because, well, you can hear it for yourself. Many years ago, a former friend of mine named Dylan and I decided to go to the state fair. It was a pretty long drive, and Dylan was my ride. After we met up with a group of 3 girls and hung out with them for a while, Dylan slipped away from the group with one of the girls, and they disappeared. I assumed they had gone off to find a bit of privacy, which was fine, I guess, since I stayed behind hanging out with the other 2. But when closing time came, and all the stalls and rides started shutting down, I walked back to where Dylan had parked his car and found it gone. I was furious, completely out of my mind that he would pull something like that. Dylan always had those selfish tendencies when it came to women, but this felt like an entirely different level. I remember walking around the parking area, asking people nearby if they were headed back to Carterville, but no one was going my way. As the lot grew emptier and emptier, it sank in that if I wanted to get home, I was going to have to walk. It was miserable covering that distance on foot. The whole time, I was stewing in anger over Dylan driving off and leaving me behind. About 2.5 hours into the walk, I started reaching more populated areas. By then, I had calmed down a bit. I found myself looking at the houses I passed, thinking about how peaceful everything felt in the middle of the night. The homes had long driveways, though not so long that I couldn't see their fronts. As I passed one of them, there was just enough light from the nearby interstate frontage road for me to notice a large, dark handprint pressed against one of the downstairs windows. It stood out so sharply against the lighter-colored curtains that it stopped me cold in my tracks. I still don't know if it was the texture or the way it was smeared, but a voice in my head started whispering, asking if that was blood. Instead of just walking away, I hopped the fence, walked up the driveway, and shined my phone's light onto the window. The hand-shaped smear was a deep blood red. Something bad had happened in that house, and I knew that if I later saw it on the news, I'd feel like a complete fool for doing nothing. I rang the doorbell a few times. When there was no answer, and I didn't hear or see any movement or lights from inside, I decided to head around back to check there. I know that probably sounds crazy to people who would never put themselves into a potentially dangerous situation like that, but I've never been the type to just leave things alone. That's just how I am. I hopped the second fence and made my way into the backyard, hoping I could look through another window or something. Most of the curtains were drawn, all the lights were off, and the back door was locked tight. There were no more bloody handprints and no cries for help from inside, just a heavy, dead silence. With my options pretty much exhausted, I decided to call 911 and request a welfare check. I took my phone out, and just as the screen lit up, I heard the sound of a key turning in the back door of the house. I kept my phone ready to dial 911 in case the person unlocking the door was badly hurt. But when the door opened, a man stepped out wearing a mask and holding a gun, telling me to drop my phone and get on the ground. I thought about trying to run, but escaping the way I came meant closing the distance between us. And if he was serious about using that gun, I'd be an easy target. I had no real choice but to do what he said. So I tossed my phone out in front of me and lay flat on my stomach as another masked man appeared in the doorway behind him. Whatever they had planned, a robbery or something worse, it clearly wasn't going the way they expected, and I could tell by the way they whispered to each other that they were panicking. The handprint was probably left when they killed the homeowner, and my heart dropped when I realized I was likely next. When one of the men started walking toward me, I won't lie, I begged him not to kill me. I didn't say it outright, but I tried reasoning with him right up until he kicked me in the head and told me to shut up. When he ordered me to look at him, I stayed quiet, and I knew right then that my time was up. But instead of shooting me in the face, he wanted a clean swing, smashing the grip of his pistol into my face and jaw. I'm guessing it was in the hope that it would knock me out. I knew well enough to play possum after the first hit, which was the one that left me with my scar. But he decided to give me another blow before he was satisfied that I was out. I heard him pick up my phone and toss it, and I waited until it felt safe for me to move again, which was only a few minutes later after I heard a car speed off on the street out front. I had to keep on walking like I should have done to begin with, and wait for a passing car so I could flag it down and get help. Luckily, the first one that came my way ended up stopping. The two people in the front seat were kind enough to drive me to the emergency room, and they let me use their cell phone to call the cops on the way. An officer met me at the hospital while I was still getting stitches, and I gave him a fairly basic account of what had happened before getting a cab home from the hospital. I thought that would be the last I'd hear of it, since the cops would surely be much more interested in whatever had gone on at that house. They were, I guess, but I still got a call from them, and it was a pretty serious one. They said I needed to come down to the sheriff's office to talk to a detective there. They weren't pushy about it, but it was clear that I didn't have a choice in the matter. So I went over to talk to this woman from the state police. I'd been hoping that whatever had happened had been non-fatal, but I knew that was just wishful thinking. And when the detective said the homeowner had been murdered, I honestly wasn't surprised. But the detective then said I needed to be cleared as a suspect, because they still didn't have a full picture of what had happened that night. And that was something I hadn't even considered. I was more than willing to cooperate, since I obviously had nothing to hide. But while getting fingerprinted and having my cheek swabbed for DNA, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous, as I thought about wrongful convictions and all that kind of thing. The good news came days later. My story checked out, and I wouldn't be hearing from them again, unless it was to act as a witness in court. But as much as I hoped that call might come one day, it never did. And to this day, I still don't fully know what happened to that poor guy, or why those masked men broke in and killed him. My name is Emily, and I'm from London. and I used to work in a restaurant that finished quite late on weekends. Whenever I finished a shift, I took the exact same route home, which involved walking through a massive construction site with a kind of pedestrian walkway running through the middle of it. It was lined with tall grey barriers, broken up by adverts for the building firm. It felt ironic, given that they couldn't build it in a straight line, and their efforts resulted in an awkward zigzag pattern where you sometimes got jump-scared by random dog walkers as you reached a zig or turned onto a zag. It was clean and shiny when it first went up, but over time it started to smell faintly of piss. No surface stays clean in London for long. It's like the graffiti artists can sense them. Grim as it was, I gradually got used to walking down that horrible little passageway. The jump scares weren't as bad once you knew they were coming. This isn't about anyone jumping out at me or chasing me down the narrow walkway. It's about something that appeared on the wall one day. As I mentioned, the passageway's gray metal walls ended up heavily graffitied, and over the many times I walked through it, I became familiar with most of the art on display. Some pieces were actually quite nice, and some were not. I could tell which ones were old and which ones were brand new. So that night, as I walked down the passageway, I noticed a newer piece of graffiti that must have been added after I'd passed through the previous night. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't a picture, a name, or a slogan. It looked more like a note, almost a letter, with the words "Read Me" written at the top. I wasn't planning on reading it. I just wanted to get home and sink into the bath. But when I saw who the note was addressed to, I couldn't help myself, because it was written to "Wine bar girl who walks here most nights." I can't remember exactly what the rest of it said, since I only skimmed it before walking off at double speed. Painful as it is to recall, I can sum it up simply. It said that I was pretty, that someone was watching me, and that this person wanted to bash my pretty face in with a brick once they were done violating me. I remember thinking, "Oh my God," as I walked away even faster than before, and somehow I made it home without running into whoever wrote that note. I ended up crying uncontrollably in the bathtub, trying to understand how people can be such creeps. After that, I started taking taxis home, at least until I changed jobs and no longer had to commute at night. Even so, I have never forgotten the stomach-churning terror I felt when I realized that note was meant for me.